Since Trump was sworn into office in January of this year, citizens of the United States have seen a frankly alarming amount of strong decisions pour into our New York Times email inboxes. Sometimes I do a double take and wonder if I've signed up for the Onion, but nope, that's just real life. So as our world more or less burns to ashes in front of our very eyes, a lot of us are left wondering, how is this being allowed to happen, legally speaking, and how can we challenge it? Well, usually these things are challenged by the United States court system, and the final court of appeal is the Supreme Court. So I'm here to answer the important question: should legal challenges to a president's executive orders immediately go to the Supreme Court? The answer, without a doubt, is yes. In today's speech, I'll establish three central reasons for why this is the case. First of all, if we don't subject them to high-level dispute, continued ignorance of unconstitutional and cruel use of power by the president and his administration will continue. Second of all, going through a system of motions to get to the Supreme Court in the first place wastes crucial time and resources and allows these major issues to fade into the background for many. And third of all, it's easier for the White House administrations to ignore rulings from lower-level court systems. So let's address that first point. If we don't address these questions with an appropriate amount of alarm, many average citizens will brush it off as unimportant. Trump issues a massive number of orders targeting smaller-scale individualized issues. Though he ends up affecting everyone, you can't truly care about every single one at the same time, and genuine threats to the United States law and values in its Constitution will go unchallenged. People have real-life issues to attend to. People must pay the bills. People must put food on the table for their kids, and they can't worry about things that don't affect them always. So, politics in the end is the business of politicians and of people who work in the court system. So we can't wait for the individual to take action, or else people will suffer in the meantime while the issue is being pushed to the edge of rebellion. So for example, AP News published an article talking about how Trump is punishing someone just for being against him. This person is a Paul Weiss attorney, and he was a Manhattan investigator trying to figure out the question of how to punish or if to punish Trump for his crimes. And Trump is a convicted felon, in fact. In fact, the Paul Weiss company of lawmaking and not lawmaking, but the Paul Weiss legal company. I'm so sorry, Mr. Boussard. The Paul Weiss company, since 1875, has been known for pushing civil rights. The AP News article states that the order against that firm, Paul Weiss, that means, and others demands that security clearances of its lawyers be suspended, that federal contracts be terminated, and that employee access to federal buildings be restricted. But this doesn't affect the average citizen, even though it speaks of a broader issue that the Trump administration's power is going unchecked. So, as a result, 500 law firms signed a petition to block the order, but it's still not going to the Supreme Court. Which brings me to my next point. Navigating a complex judicial system takes away crucial time and lessens the urgency of the issues at hand. When one major issue of the executive orders goes after the other, problems stack up, and going through one court system after the other lessens the sense of urgency that just going immediately into the Supreme Court would convey. Imagine it this way. On Monday, one order is issued targeting one group. On Tuesday, an order is issued targeting the next group, and on Wednesday, another one. By the time in a few months that it goes from one court to the other, average citizens have simply moved on. But the power and the control of power that the Trump administration is assuming in the meantime is going unchecked. Essentially, the bureaucracy in the United States acts as a sort of force field for totalitarian administrations to exercise power unconstitutionally. And finally, it's simply easier for the White House to just ignore rulings from lower-level courts. In the last months, we've seen various lawsuits be filed by individuals and loan corporations against the United States. Many of them, despite their importance, are simply filtered out of national news and higher-level court systems for an array of reasons. However, when the scale is wider and it's outright brought before a higher-level federal court, like the Supreme Court, and challenged head-on, we've seen promising hopeful results. In fact, the Democracy Docket reported that so far the courts have consistently ruled against the Trump administration. Federal judges have blocked the White House's federal funding freeze, the Birthright Citizenship Executive Order, and the Department of Government Efficiency's access to sensitive information in several key agencies. The Trump administration follows a sort of policy where they implement first and defend later. So veering a little bit off piste here to put into perspective. the issue. The courts and professionals are calling the events of this last year a constitutional crisis on the basis that the Trump administration is passing unconstitutional policies, which they implement first and worry about defending, legally speaking, later. And the Trump administration is calling it a constitutional crisis on the basis that the courts are ruling against them. But what that proves is that courts matter. They are at the heart of democracy, and the final alarm bells would ring if these matters were to reach the Supreme Court, and especially if the Trump administration were to defy Supreme Court rulings. In the end, if we stop worrying about semantics and philosophical debate, or whether this is a constitutional crisis or not, or whether any laws are being truly broken, we all know at the root of it all that we are teetering on the edge of totalitarianism, and we know far too much about history from the side defending against unjust authority to allow it to happen to us. Those who do not heed the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. Thank you.